got it from the season. Oh, off-air convo makes it on air, very live at the end there, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this disorganized introduction, which is kind of actually the status quo for my intros to the show. Welcome back to your favorite NFL podcast, the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. Yes, we actually took last week off, ladies and gentlemen, for circumstances. I honestly, just A, there was nothing to talk about, and B, 2/3 of the podcast can make it. And as much as we would love to see a solo show from one of the guys one of these days, I do want to see either a Rick or Justin solo podcast one of these days. We're going to try to make sure that we always have at least 2 out of 3 of the boys here. Opening the show, as always, Iceman Jerk. Joined with me, one of my compatriots of chaos, Justin Zuckman, Zucktails. Zuckeronomy. I don't know. I'm struggling to put the word Zuck in front of stuff at this point. Zucker, Justin, how we doing here?
Doing good. How you doing?
Didn't expect that last one there, did you?
No, that was a new one for me.
I think I'm just gonna start putting the first 4 letters of your last name just in front of random words, and we're gonna just see how it works. So that'll be the next evolution of this podcast for sure. And we're just gonna mess with Justin's lower third probably here and there. But as everyone can see, not joining us this week, sadly. Where are you at, Podfather Rick? Nah, Rick has work that he's doing, allegedly.
We put him back in the darkness.
Yes. We had to send him back into the darkness retreat for his little spiel 2 weeks ago, being a Chicago Bears fan. Although we can confirm, at least I can confirm, Justin hasn't seen it yet. We can confirm he did get the Cole Kmet jersey, whatever. Yes, he has it. It's in his possession. Confirmed.
What a wild turn of events.
Honestly, who would have thought a joke of us for 1 week during the season, caping up for Cole Kmet over Devontae Adams in terms of performance for 1 week, would eventually culminate into that. Better long-term storytelling than the WWE, actually, if you ask me, Justin. In my opinion, I think our podcast does storytelling better. And we don't even plan this stuff out. That's the funny part. We don't even plan it. It's all natural, especially on Rick's side. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We don't know 90% of what Rick is going to do when it comes to the podcast.
I always knew he would join forces with Adam Rank eventually.
Oh no, Rick's going to get you back for that one next week.
Bring it on. He's a fair weather fan. Hopping on the bandwagon of the worst teams in the NFL.
Yeah, that sounds about right, all things considered. So now that the self-indulgence is out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, we have a fun week set up for you guys. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, is the Sports Agents of Chaos second ever mock draft. It is our 2023 3-round mock. We started with the 3-round mock last year of the 2022 draft. Banger of a show, Xfinity Wi-Fi aside. Banger of an episode that we had. And we're going to bring it back next week. We're going to have a fun time, to say the very least. We got all the teams have already been decided. Everyone has their teams. Everyone has their picks. It's all good. We might actually make that. We'll tell everyone what all of our teams are at the very end of the episode today. But we got that settled, so that's coming next week. This week, it's a little bit of a lead up and a preview to the 2023 draft in and of itself. We're going to be talking about last year's draft, actually, the draft we did a mock of, the draft that we just saw this rookie class play. We are going to do 1 year now into the future, a very brief, well, not brief, a quick look back on that 2022 draft and early returns, you could say, from the players that were picked just in the first round, not the second and third round. No, we're not doing the 3-round look back here. Just a first round look back to last year's draft. Who's done well? Who's kind of surprised us from that draft? Who's disappointed us? Guys who should have been picked in that first round that went much later in the draft. A couple obvious ones there. And ultimately, we all have a first round grade for last year's draft. I think you'll be a little bit surprised about the range of the grades that we have for last year's 2022 draft. But before we get to that, we also have some talk about guys who could still get traded, because free agency is basically done. All the big free agents have signed guys, but that doesn't mean the transactions are necessarily complete, because there are still some big names that have been rumored since the very beginning of the offseason that still could very much get traded before the draft, after the draft, or before, during, and after the draft. The NFL offseason never sleeps. The NFL offseason is never done. And that's what we're here for, because that just makes our podcast better when we actually have stuff to talk about. But before we get to the football, before we get to the utter chaos at the end, let's have some fun. Justin, we got some Would You Rather.
Yes, we do. All right. So we'll keep it topical for this week, and we'll talk about the 2022 NFL Draft. And I'm going to ask you, who would you have rather taken first overall?
Oh,
Would it have been Sauce Gardner or Aiden Hutchinson?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a really good one because
it seems like those are the top guys defensively that came out of the draft in the first round. I know that there's some other good names that are there, but these are the guys that have really been making waves defensively. As we know, Trayvon Walker went first. He did have a good season, not terrible, 3.5 sacks, played well, but I don't think he necessarily lived up to that number one overall title. Would you rather have?
And I will say real quick with Trayvon Walker, that is the inherent risk of drafting a guy who really shot up the draft boards that late. But also, I think we all agreed going into last year's draft, the potential is still off the charts for Trayvon Walker. But the early returns were always going to be a little bit, they weren't going to be as good as some of the other guys in the draft, to say the very least. Still could be a very good, I think year 2, year 3, obviously will be the big years for Trayvon Walker to see. If he has a double-digit sack season either this year or next, that pick ain't looking too bad for the Jags, to say the very least. But
No.
let's go to the would you rather here. So Sauce Gardner or Aiden Hutchinson for that. So it kind of depends. Thinking back to what the Jaguars roster was last season, they had some guys that they had signed to the defensive back crew. I'm thinking he's no longer on the team because they actually did cut him, which I realized that late. What's his name from the Seahawks that they got? Shaquille Griffin. So they had got Shaquille Griffin to be their lead corner last season. I believe last season, did they trade? Who's that first round corner from a few years ago they drafted that just didn't want to tackle? They had a previous corner.
Did Jacksonville traded?
Yeah.
From Florida.
Yeah. We're thinking of the same guy. We know who it is. We're just like the name is escaping us.
Yeah.
I forget if they traded him last year or the year before that. But also, I think CJ Henderson.
Yep.
Yes. So look at that. The brain remembers eventually. So at least the last 2 years, it was supposed to be Shaquille Griffin with the free agency signing and CJ Henderson was the draft pick. But both guys now at this point have been cut/traded ever since then. You have, Aiden Hutchinson, definitely amazing in Detroit, had a really good rookie season for the Lions. He finished 9 sacks, I think? 8.5, something along those lines. He was very close to 10.
I will let you know.
He was very close to 10. He had a couple of interceptions as well, which is big. So Aiden Hutchinson definitely would have been boon to the defensive line. But man, like it's so tough because you talk about the impact that Sauce Gardner has and literally shutting down half the field. And I think with defensive backs, but especially quarterbacks, I think the style of play has evolved to a point where when we were, and this isn't too long ago, when we were younger, Justin, like the big thing when looking at cornerbacks was people always counted the interception numbers. But I think we've learned now, and we've evolved with learning with the sport itself, is that you can't just look at interception numbers when it comes to your corners, especially your shutdown corners, because there's a reason why they don't get a lot of interceptions. The ball's just not going to be thrown their way as much. You think of some of the best shutdown guys in the game. Jalen Ramsey at his peak, when he was at the peak of his powers, came up with some interceptions here and there, but he was very good at shutting down half the field. I think Jair Alexander from the Green Bay Packers is another example. I don't think he's had a massive number of interceptions in a specific season, but he is the guy on that defense. He is the definitive piece of that defense. I think Xavier Howard has 2 different seasons in the league. His first big interception season, he was still kind of an unknown at that point, and that's why teams were still testing him. And then the second one, he had Byron Jones before, so that's why. So it's very much like what your expectations are and what you want. It's kind of, to me, a flip of a coin between, do I want to pair Aiden Hutchinson with Josh Allen and really have a strong pass rush, or do I want to get that corner who's going to shut down half the field for me? And you could think to yourself, if you look at the division, like, well, who do you have to worry about in that division wide receiver wise, right? That the Tennessee Titans don't have anyone. I mean, they don't have a quarterback to throw the football either, but they don't have a top flight wide receiver you'd have to worry about in those 2 games. The Indianapolis Colts, yes, they have Pittman, but he had a good season last year, but still, like, he's more, as of now, to me, a high-end number 2, potentially, that just so happens to be number 1 at the moment. And then the Houston Texans, I don't even think they technically have a wide receiver 3 on the roster, let alone a wide receiver 1. So I understand some people might argue in the division, but then you have to look past that. You have to look at if this Jacksonville Jaguars team has the, the belief with making the playoffs this year that they want to get to the playoffs. Now you're talking about when you make it to the playoffs, you got the Chargers in that division. They got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Yes. And yes, I know they beat the Chargers with a blown lead in there, but that's still two very good wide receivers on one team. You go to the Kansas City Chiefs side of things, not necessarily saying Sauce Gardner would be on Travis Kelce, but he would still have a role in trying to shut down the other weapons on that team. He'd be very active in that game, to say the very least. Cincinnati Bengals team, Jamar Chase would be the matchup. At Buffalo Bills with Stephon Diggs. A very, very slight edge. I would pick Sauce Gardner here because I think if you're this Jaguars team, I think the playoffs has become your ultimate goal. And I need that guy that has the potential to blanket the number one wide receiver on the other team. I'm talking about Justin. You're a Jets fan. You saw when he was at the peak of his powers, Darrelle Revis, who only Randy Moss is really the guy that I definitively remember. Only the best of the best, the Hall of Famers, the guys that will get gold jackets were the ones that would beat Darrelle Revis multiple times a game. And if that, Darrelle Revis would also get his against them. I think of Jalen Ramsey in his career with the Rams. Whenever they would face the Seahawks, DK Metcalf would struggle against Jalen Ramsey. Some of DK Metcalf's worst games in his career in terms of catches and yards are when Jalen Ramsey was the guy covering him. It's a legitimate thing. I think when you consider that, I would go Sauce Gardner because I'm looking forward to the playoffs. I'm looking at, if we face the Bills, we got to cover Stephon Diggs. If we face the Bengals, we got to cover Jamar Chase. And I think Sauce Gardner can do that. I think they can build. Here's the thing. I think you can definitively find an Aiden Hutchinson in this year's draft. Very good base, can help with the pass rush. I think the Jaguars could potentially find that with their pick. Maybe if it was a little bit higher, more so, immediate talent. But I think they could find that. Sauce Gardner, you're talking about a guy who day one can shut down half the side of the field. I know we can see high drafted corners, and there are going to be some, at least pretty good corners in this year's draft. I think maybe one might get taken in the top 10, maybe. But Sauce Gardner is different, to say the least. But again, that's nothing against Aiden Hutchinson. Very supremely talented, but I think with the ceiling, I think I got to go with Sauce Gardner there.
Interesting. And originally it was not supposed to be Jacksonville Jaguars question, just more of a who would you rather have, but I like the way you took it. And it's interesting because the Jaguars actually kind of could have used both last year. They were in the bottom 5 in passing yards allowed, and I think they were 8th fewest sacks. An extra 6 sacks would have catapulted them back up into the middle of the group. So
they would have gotten interceptions from either or because Aiden Hutchinson had 2 or 3.
Aiden Hutchinson had 3 interceptions as well.
So yeah. I think honestly either guy would have worked, and even taking away the Jaguars again, either guy could have worked in the situation because Justin, you were even aside.
Oh man. Let's see here. All right. So we're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars and whether or not they would have taken Aiden Hutchinson or Sauce Gardner above before they took Trayvon Walker. And the interesting part was actually Aiden Hutchinson's numbers because he really did. If there was a player who I would have voted for, obviously being a biased Jet fan here, I probably would have voted for Sauce Gardner. But Aiden Hutchinson had a fantastic year, started all 17 games. He had 3 interceptions. He had 3 pass defense, 2 fumble recoveries too, and a 9.5 sacks, which is a really great year for a rookie. Again, Trayvon Walker not having a bad year. He had 3.5 sacks and a single pick, but I mean the tackle numbers aren't there, and the sack numbers obviously not the same. Jacksonville could have really used that. We would also go with another candidate here. So if we're looking back at the draft, we would probably look at Derek Stingley Jr., who had a very nice year as well. Obviously, they're not going to compare to these top guys in the draft, but this was another top 4 player who was highly touted coming out of high school and college, and he played well for the Texans last year. I don't have his stats up at the moment, but we are clearly having some technical difficulties here.
That was entertaining to say the very least.
That was the best technical difficulties I think I've ever seen in my entire life. For us to both get kicked, but the show to stay on is
it's amazing.
Oh man,
it's amazing. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. Usually, at least one of us stays on.
I was on for a little while, but
and then it kicked you.
Yeah, that's fine. I was floundering anyways. I was so thrown off by I started talking about Derek Stingley.
Really?
Couldn't bring up his stats.
You were just about to bring up his stats?
I was trying.
Do you want to talk about Derek Stingley? Let's continue the convo from what you had. Let's entertain the beautiful people.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. You know,
that was good. Would you rather? Would you rather be in the studio answering questions or kicked off from your
Wi-Fi? Both. Yeah, I would rather be able to. I would rather be able to pause the show. I would rather be able to do this, but Xfinity doesn't allow you to do something sometimes. So, what are you gonna do? Get better Wi-Fi? But we can't get better Wi-Fi, but we can move on to bigger and better things in the show, ladies and gentlemen. We can move on to bigger and better segments. So, NFL Would You Rather is done. Not sure if you had fact or fiction this week, Justin. But we could probably save that for an extra week.
We did it while we were off the air. Unfortunately, we missed it, so we'll move on.
What was the fact or fiction that you were telling the people?
That's fine. We'll work about it next week.
Damn it. All right, I will. When I mute, I'm going to mute myself and listen to what you were talking about. No, but let's move on to this. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have, like I was talking about at the beginning of the show, draft day deals. We mentioned it in portions of free agency. We kind of sprinkling it out. While guys have been signed, while plenty of free agency transactions have happened, there is still the idea of players can still get moved. There are a lot of guys, I'm sure, if you follow NFL, that have been put into trade rumors, to say the very least. And we actually have a list of guys based off of a wonderful article from, let me actually credit the proper article here before I continue on. CBS Sports made an awesome article that the boys found and got to me of guys who could still get traded and shopped before, during, and it doesn't say it in the title, but after the NFL draft as well. So these are a list of guys who could very much still be on the move, could still be swapped to new teams, and could still make an impact in the NFL on potential new clubs. So in order for us to talk about that, we need a conversation starter, to say the very least, Justin. And I think I have the perfect conversation starter for us in this segment.
I'm getting ready for a 3-round mock draft coming up next week as well. Did want to come in with some videos and some projections based upon our topics of discussion. And also wearing the nice powder blue because I feel like it's going to be a nice catharsis for, my theme of this week, which is going to be a nice calming session until, of course, the Rand Podium. And I did want to talk about some guys that are going to go under the radar a bit, especially in our first category, which is the players who could be dealt before or even during the draft. The names like Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson, everyone's talking about them, but let's talk about names that, may not be in the discussion right away. Courtland Sutton from Denver is first. The Broncos have Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick and a pretty good wide receiver room. Courtland Sutton's a guy who what he is, but he's also owed a lot of money. I think he might be owed $17 million. And if Denver moves him, they'll save about $7 million in cap space. I don't know. I mean, I know that the Broncos owners have a lot of money there, but Sean Payton, I think, could be more inclined to go with the younger talent than Jerry Jeudy. He's a very, very talented receiver. And so is Sutton, too, in his own right. So I think that the Broncos could look to do that. And keep in mind this, too. Denver does not have a first-round pick or even a second-round pick. They have the 67th and 68th picks. So if they're willing to move Courtland Sutton and try and get up into that second round, or even a first-round deal like what Philadelphia pulled last year to get A.J. Brown into the mix over there, it could be something that could work out in their favor. You never know. Aside from Courtland Sutton, I think that Montez Sweat of the Commanders is another guy we have to talk about. Washington has an embarrassment of riches on the D-line. They've got Chase Young, they've got Daron Payne, who they just re-upped for a lot of money, and Jonathan Allen's there too. So Montez Sweat's kind of on the odd side looking in, if you will. He's a great player, don't get me wrong. Another scenario where it's a cap hit, but it's also a case that they could move him to kind of get a little further up in the draft too. And, try and draft somebody else for another need that they have. I think Montez Sweat's a good chess piece to move around in that scenario. The last name is Devin White. Tampa Bay needs to know what they are past Tom Brady because Devin White is going to be on the books for about $11.7 million. And if Tampa wants to cut him or trade him to get him off the books, that could be huge for them too. The NFC South is going to be a little more wide open this year because no Tom Brady. The Saints and Falcons have made their moves, and the Panthers are there too at number 1. Tampa Bay's kind of just sitting pretty. But if they want to move Devin White, he's been a great player for them, but a polarizing linebacker. I think he's a guy that could be moved. And, it's a name that, again, you might not think about, but it's a name that could draw some interest in the draft and on deadline days.
He may not have been here in person, ladies and gentlemen, but the Podfather is always here in spirit. I'm sure the people who have actually watched the show before probably figured there were going to be some Rick videos in this one, to say the very least. But no, I actually, Justin, even jokes aside, I really love the 3 names that Rick started off with there, with Sutton, Sweat, and Devin White. So let's quick go one at a time with the 3 that he started off the combo with in terms of guys that could get dealt. Courtland Sutton has been someone I mentioned even a couple years. I almost said years, a couple weeks back, in terms of someone that the Denver, maybe they've been chopping in for years, who knows? But the Denver Broncos have very much been weirdly interested in dealing off at least one of their wide receivers. Why, considering they just got Sean Payton and they have Russell Wilson there, they need weapons? I don't know. But they want to trade someone regardless. Rick brings up Courtland Sutton there, so let's stick with Courtland Sutton specifically. What do you think about the idea of the Broncos trading Sutton, and just one team you think would be a great pickup for a great team? One great fit for Sutton, I should say it like that more so.
That is a good question. It's funny because when you think of the Broncos, I would have thought that they maybe would have traded Jerry Jeudy, but Rick's right. I think he's owed a lot more money, and the Broncos could use a bump up in draft capital. So if you want to look at teams that need receivers, an interesting one would be the Los Angeles Rams, a team that generally does not hold on to draft capital and, could very well be in the market to move up. They do have an early second-round pick. I'm trying to see. They don't have a later one. So they are picking early in the second round if they could maybe, package a second-round pick for Courtland Sutton and maybe one of the multiple third-round picks that the Broncos have. Might be a good way to get some young infused talent there. They needed some help next to Cooper Kupp last year, and Allen Robinson was not the answer to that situation. Very similar styles in play, so look for that to make a move, to be a big move for them.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. I think Courtland Sutton is very talented. I don't know why they want to get rid of him. I guess maybe Sean Payton just doesn't vibe with him.
You have to spend.
I don't really have an answer.
There's a cap.
That's very true, but I feel like
he's owed a lot of
considering
money.
the Russell Wilson contract.
They have very good
unfortunately signed.
If you have embarrassment,
they have good receivers, but
look, it's not like Courtland Sutton has ever lit the world on fire. Everyone thinks he's going to be the next best receiver next year, but realistically, he never stays healthy enough to prove that to begin with. So if you're not going to stay on the field and you're going to be owed a ton of money, and you have a good deep receiving room, why are you holding on to a guy like that when you could use some draft capital to address some other positions?
Fair enough. Fair shout. And get younger and cheaper talent there. Okay. All right. You've convinced me. Yeah, Courtland Sutton, it makes sense. Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, they have, it feels like every other season there, they have a wide receiver that gets injured in the preseason, and it just, everything goes to handbasket when it comes to the Denver Broncos. I think, was it not this season, or was it the year before that even that Tim Patrick himself got injured for an extended period of time?
ACL, he didn't play last year.
There we go. So, they keep getting hurt. The Broncos receivers just keep getting hurt, which, if you're Sean Payton, this is something he's dealt with before, aka slant boy, aka Michael Thomas. But yeah, it makes sense. If I had to pick a team, did I bring them up a couple weeks ago when we brought up Sutton? Maybe I didn't. I think the Carolina Panthers would make a lot of sense for Courtland Sutton. They're already going to get their future franchise quarterback. Why not get a wide receiver in there? I know they did sign Adam Thielen in free agency, but he's a little bit on the older side. I think they could use some younger talent in their free agency, in their wide receiver room. And again, Rick said it best. He also mentioned it when it came to the Devin White situation, so let's actually just skip to Devin White with it. The NFC South is wide open. The NFC South, to me, does not have a definitive favorite. And I think after this draft, and as we let the rest of the offseason go by, I think, again, all three of us are going to have a different team winning the NFC South come our preseason predictions later on in the year in like July and August. So that being said, you have one team we just mentioned, and again, we're just throwing out names here of who could acquire a guy like a Courtland Sutton. Let's talk about a team that maybe is going to get rid of a player, a guy who was a key piece on a championship team just a few years ago. Devin White had a phenomenal playoff run for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a part of that ferocious defense, as a part of that linebacking duo. Him and Levante David were absolutely dominating the playoffs on the NFC side and then continue to do so in the Super Bowl, just absolutely punishing the Kansas City Chiefs offensively. I believe he played out his rookie deal, if I'm not mistaken. They've already exercised his fifth-year option, if memory serves, or this is his last year of his rookie deal he's going into with the fifth-year option. So this is a guy that you will have to pay relatively soon if you are a team that would want to acquire him, but he's shown super talent before. Shown he can play at this level. He's shown he can play great football when it matters for a team that is trying to go for it. So you consider all that, Justin, it almost kind of makes you think, well, why would Tampa want to give that up? But then the things that Rick mentions, Tom Brady's not there anymore. They've had to hit a complete reset button when it comes to the quarterback situation there. A lot of factors, to me, point to there could be some purging there of whatever's left of that team. I think if the Buccaneers are down bad next season, which they probably will be, I think they could certainly be a team to sell off some guys. That's why I think you could say your thoughts on this. I don't think Devin White gets traded now. I think he gets traded during the season, closer to the deadline.
That's fair. I'm always a proponent of trying to do things before the season because the longer guys are there, I always felt the better payoff you get if you got a full off season with a team and you can really develop and come into your own in the off season. You get a higher return for a player. So that's why I was always a proponent of trading players before, during, and after the draft, as opposed to during the season. Now, that being said, there's nothing wrong with trading for a guy during the season. We've seen plenty of teams do that and have success and really have players come into their own during the season to help them out. So it's possible. I wouldn't say it's impossible. And then there's plenty of teams that, could use the services such as his. A lot of teams could use a good linebacker. I would say Detroit is probably someone who would be interested, maybe Seattle, even the Giants, these middle of the road teams that struggled at linebacker last year that could use some help from a solid young but veteran presence. So yeah, I definitely think he's a top trade candidate. Where he goes is another story, but I love the shout.
Yeah, where he goes, especially you mentioned a couple teams there that could use linebackers. You got the Minnesota Vikings who cut Kendricks earlier in the offseason, so he's gone. You have the Seattle Seahawks, which, yes, they did reunite with Bobby Wagner, who still played pretty well. I think he was second team All-Pro last season, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. You add another linebacker there. You have the New York Giants, who I think you mentioned, where they were allegedly there was some interest there with him and for Bobby Wagner, at least outside looking in. There was at least the idea that they could have tried to go after Bobby Wagner. And I brought this up. It was about a different linebacker. But I think the Pittsburgh Steelers could still very much be in play for a linebacker. And Devin White to the Pittsburgh Steelers,
they got to be in play for a linebacker.
Yeah, right. Always. And they cut Miles Jack from last season. It just didn't work out. So why not go after another linebacker who's currently playing on a Florida-based team in a Devin White? It would certainly be interesting to say the very least. And hey, they've had success with a linebacker with the first name Devin from the 2019 draft class before, Devin Bush, who really things fell off after his rookie season, in part due to level of play, in part due to injuries, overall speaking. But yeah, no, the Devin White and Courtland Sutton, great shouts there. Some changes happening. And then last up, do we call them his former beloved Commanders because he has a new team, or I don't know what we have to refer to the Commanders as?
I don't know. That was a weird take last year. I never understood where that was going.
I still don't understand why I went with him at the preseason.
I didn't want to not to. You could have very easily picked the Cowboys and been way ahead of him.
Yeah, that probably would.
Didn't even have to jump on my bandwagon.
Yeah, very true. I'll learn
and been way ahead of him.
I'll try. You know what? That's sad but true. I'll try to disagree with Rick, at least on the NFC East side of things for this upcoming season. But Montez Sweat, I do agree with the concept of too many pieces there. And I think we saw late in the season there was some turmoil along that defensive line. Do you think Montez Sweat is the guy to be moved there in Washington? Because he mentioned it. Chase Young is the guy that they drafted super high. Yes, he's been injured, but I feel like they would give him way more leeway. And they did just
Yeah.
re-sign Deron Payne. So is Montez Sweat really the guy that goes out there?
It seems like he's the odd man out there. There's only so much money to go around, and as much as you'd like to pay all of the guys that are there, you can't. You can't, especially when you have a lot of issues on the other side of the ball. So, and in fact, in the secondary, they were times last year where they could have really used some extra pass defense. I think that he will end up being traded. I don't know if it's now. I don't know if they try and get a deal done and maybe lose him for nothing, but it doesn't seem like he's going to be the guy there long term. And I know there's a ton of teams out there that would be willing to use his services. It's interesting because when you have so many high draft picks along a defensive line, you have so many productive players, it's almost like, well, is he getting production because they're guarding the other players? And once he's guarded, will he still be able to get the same production? Or is it more of like there's so much else going on around him that he's not getting the production that he should get because there are so many other people stealing from his pie. So it'll be interesting to see how he evolves once he's no longer on Washington. But I would agree with Rick. I would say out of all the players there, he seems like the odd man out.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you bring up there, Justin, that I think would lead him to being a prime trade candidate, especially now, because again, I think because of the openness of the NFC South, I think that's why Tampa could potentially try to wait and see when it comes to Devin White. And he wasn't on the article that we're basing our conversations off of, but Chris Godwin. I feel like they might wait to go deeper into the season to see how they are, because if they're like 4-3 after 7 weeks, I think they might make the determination of try to keep the band together if you're Tampa. Whereas I think Washington, you have the defending NFC champions in your division. You have a team in the Dallas Cowboys that made it and they won a playoff game, even with the Giants. So the top 3 teams above you in your division all won playoff games this past year and all made it, and one of them made it to the Super Bowl. Like that is a very tough division. And selling off a piece like a Montez Sweat, it might suck for the time being, but if it gets you assets back that you could use future down the line, if maybe one of these teams could fall off, you never know. You might have to try to take that chance. So
it's interesting. Chris Godwin to me seems like I'm not really a big baseball guy, but if I had to make a comparison, he seems to me like Yoenis Cespedes on the A's.
Ooh.
He's that player that you could turn around and trade for, and he could put you in the playoff conversation if you're in the right spot.
Right.
He's like that big bat that he's going to hit you a lot of home runs if you get him in the right situation. So that's an interesting one that I'm going to see. That's one I think that probably doesn't get traded until mid-season.
Yeah.
When you're right, when the Bucs realize that they're probably not going to do great without a quarterback there,
and they're going to fire Todd Bowles after the season. Let's be real, it's probably going to happen.
I mean, we don't have to. This will be a long one. We don't have to get into it now. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they work there.
Absolutely. So great first 3 names that Rick gives us there to get things started here. Let's clean up on the defensive side of things, because there are there's only one other definitive name on this list from what we were looking at from the Buffalo Bills here, Justin. So let's clean it up. Like I said, with the defense, Ed Oliver is on the list of guys who could get dealt according to this article, or could potentially be dealt at or around the deadline. At least conversations are going to happen around this player. Here is the basis of it. Oliver has been a sturdy presence of the Buffalo's interior for the last 4 years, but he's entering a contract year and could be angling for a lucrative extension after massive deals for veterans like Javon Hargrave on the open market. Sean McDermott would surely much rather keep him around as they try to make another title push, but if they could reallocate the $10.8 million he's due in 2023 and further bolster Allen's weapons, an early split probably isn't out of the question. So this is a case of guy's been playing good. He's had some good seasons, nothing spectacular. I don't think he's like Hargrave. We're talking about a guy who just had a double-digit sack season, just had a phenomenal year for himself. I don't think Oliver's had that, but he's been a very good presence, and maybe this could be his breakout year, to say the very least. He was certainly highly coveted coming out the draft. I think he slipped a little bit because, if I'm not mistaken, he either didn't play his last year he was in college, or only played a couple games and then chose to sit out, which, I mean, I don't blame that at all. Get your money. But and this was before NIL, ladies and gentlemen, just for context speaking. So I definitely could see a possibility where this could happen. It makes sense. Buffalo has already had to part ways with one guy on the defense from earlier in the offseason in Edmonds. And, do you think that plays a factor into Buffalo's decision of, hey, if we don't think we could get this guy signed long-term, do you think they just trade him and actually try to get an asset back this time? Whereas with Edmonds, obviously, I think if you give Buffalo the chance, I think they stick, like they wouldn't trade Edmonds. That's not what I'm trying to say. But, if you now have the choice, you now have the power, would you rather just try to get an asset back right now, or do you ride the season through and see if maybe you could find a way to keep him?
I think that they're going to try and keep him. He's quietly a very important piece on that defense in the way that he anchors that defensive line. He plays more interior than defensive end. So he's never going to be that like 10, 12, 15 sack guy that, you always want to see on a defensive line. It's very rare to find that in the middle, but he's a good run stuffer up the middle. And he really allocates a lot of attention to the point where that's why you saw Tremaine Edmonds last year have, all of those sacks. I mean, just the one on Mike White when he ran up the middle, it's because Ed Oliver took on 2 defenders. He was completely untouched. So, great play. It was a great play, and I don't mean to take anything away from Tremaine Edmonds, but it's still a team sport. And I think Ed Oliver is one of those guys that he deserves his money, and he's going to get paid whether or not it's by the Bills. I do think that they try and get something done, and it's going to be interesting to see how they can keep him. And by the way, I think the reason he fell was because he was undersized coming out of the draft. Because if you remember, they had measurements. He was shorter. He had smaller arms, and that generally doesn't translate to the league. But he's fast and he is strong. So
yeah.
And
hey, every once in a while, one of these interior defensive linemen that might be quote unquote smaller than the other guys you're used to, it could be an Oliver and they're pretty good, or they could even be an Aaron Donald. They could be a Hall of Famer. Every once in a while you hit on some of these guys, so you never know. I'm with you. I think I've heard this term more recently in hockey. It's called an own rental, where you're probably going to lose your own free agent, but you just ride it out with him. I feel like Buffalo is just going to keep him as an own rental. I'm kind of with you. If you're really going on a Super Bowl run, what asset could you get back that'll help you now have a better chance at this season rather than having Ed Oliver? I know you run the risk of losing him, but if you're really going for a push, and if this is a guy that can help you in that push, why would you trade him? Like, trust me, I fully understand it. I'm fully the type of guy who, get assets back when you get the opportunity to. But there's a difference between a Washington, who we just talked about with Montez Sweat, it's very difficult for them to make the playoffs, considering 2 of the 3 wildcard teams in last season came from their own dang division. Whereas you have a Buffalo, probably going to be highly favored to win the AFC East again. They will have a challenge from the Miami Dolphins, but if not the AFC East, they'll be a wildcard team for sure. And, if you're making that push in the playoffs, we've seen some of the last couple seasons what the defense can do in the playoffs. Ed Oliver only helps. And I don't think, even if you got a draft pick back this year to help out, I don't know if the rookie, maybe second rounder at best? Like, I don't know if the rookie you're going to get in the second or the third or fourth round, whether it's your pick or the pick you get in the trade, is going to have the same kind of impact that Ed Oliver would, personally speaking. So I definitely get the idea of some people would say trade, but I say keep him. I say go on that run and then just reevaluate. Like, you're at that point for the Bills, you need every weapon you can to make that deep playoff run. And if you have to risk losing this guy, so be it, is more what I say. But yeah, so those were all the defensive pieces that we're going to talk about from this article. Ironically, you mentioned Allen Robinson earlier, Justin. He's also a piece here, although I think for the most part, he's due $18 million over the next 2 seasons. His value is kind of low, and LA might have to eat part of his salary if they're going to try to move him. Really quick, any thoughts here on Allen Robinson, or should we move on to the bigger names on this list?
Let me just say, if the Cardinals can't trade DeAndre Hopkins because of the big number, there's no way that a team is going to take on Allen.
That the Rams could trade.
He has not lived up to expectations over the past 3 years. Maybe even longer than that. I didn't understand the signing last year to begin with. Look, I wanted the Jets to get him, not for that number. That was a crazy, crazy contract that he got there. He got signed because he's tall and he has his name commanded a decent amount of money. That's really it. He never really had that kind of production since he was in Jacksonville. So I think
and
maybe
it was that one season in Jacksonville where he was pretty good, and then I think the next season he got injured. So
yeah, and I think he had one decent year with the Bears, but he never really did anything there. So yeah, I don't understand. I think that he's more likely a cut candidate, and maybe he gets signed on as a second or third receiver on a mid-level team. But I don't see anyone taking on giving up assets to take on $18 million and have Allen Robinson. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. And I don't even know if he'd be a cut candidate this season because he still has 2 years left. I think he's probably going to be a guy that they'll just have to see if they can ingratiate him in the offense better this season. And they just got to live with that this year.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. But you mentioned the last wide receiver on this list already. So let's just bring him up here. DeAndre Hopkins still has 2 years left on his deal. Due a very nice chunk of change. You were mentioning it before, about $30 million or so over the next 2 seasons. Now it's funny that DeAndre Hopkins is on the list because people would be like, but no, you just brought in a new head coach. Kyler Murray needs him. Remember, Kyler Murray got injured late last season, guys, and he is I believe. Just I haven't looked up his status recently. I want to say I don't know if it's a guarantee in any way, shape, or form he starts 2023, and I don't even know what his earliest ETA would be for returning for the 2023 season. This is very much a rebuild/transition year for the Arizona Cardinals. So from that perspective, it kind of makes sense. Plus, they did trade for this guy last season. Marquise Brown is due an extension for the team, and considering they gave up a first-round pick for Marquise Brown, I think there might be some pressure, even though it's not this management group that made that decision, because obviously new GM, new head coach, knew all that. I think there might be a bit of pressure to be like, hey, we gave a first-round pick for this guy. We should probably keep him on the team for a little bit. So what do you think the deal with DeAndre Hopkins is going to be there? Does he get traded, or does he just end up staying with the Cardinals?
This is an interesting one because there are a lot of teams that I would have thought would have been interested. But he is going to be, I believe, the highest paid receiver in the league next year. So it's a lot to pay someone that much money and also have to give up draft capital or players or whatever it is. Obviously, once traded, he would have to agree to some sort of restructure. Maybe he would take some money up front, but he would
Is that DeAndre Hopkins calling you right now to let us know live
on the show? What's going on? No, he. I do think that he still has a lot left in the tank, and he's going to be an asset on a team. But I just don't know if he gets traded. I'm hearing a lot now that people don't want to take on that contract, and he might end up being a cut candidate, even with 2 years left on his deal.
That's certainly interesting to say the very least. I'm with you. I feel like the DeAndre Hopkins trade would have happened by now,
right?
I think it should. There was so much smoke during the season
about him. Offensive offseason moves are being held up right now.
Yeah,
because none of these players want to make decisions until they know who the quarterbacks are going to be.
Very true. Because there's 2 teams in particular.
There's 2 teams that are holding on to their quarterbacks that we don't necessarily know that they're going to be there. I mean, look, if I'm the Ravens, absolutely, I'm looking into trading for DeAndre Hopkins. But
only if,
yeah, it's not worth the trade if Lamar's not going to be there.
Exactly.
So now we have to figure out what's going on with Lamar. It's the same thing with the Jets. I mean, look at all of these receivers that are like, all right, I'm not going to sign yet. I'm going to wait to see where I am. Maybe I can go and play for a Super Bowl winning team with a great quarterback. Maybe I want to be the 5th receiver on the Jets. Maybe someone's going to turn around and say, look, I think the Jets have a great roster. What if DeAndre Hopkins is like, I can make an impact on the Jets? He would be the number 1 receiver there. He'd push Lazard to the 3.
Yeah. Garrett Wilson at your 2 and DeAndre Hopkins as your number 1. You're playing fantasy right there. No, I'm definitely with you, man. I think the Hopkins deal would have already happened. I think that Arizona's just gonna have him on this season. Or maybe come the trade deadline when they've eaten, because I think part of this is conversations with ownership, Justin. This again, diving into hockey a little bit, this is very much a hockey thing where when it comes to guys and their contracts being traded, there's very much a difference between, and I think this is way more of a hockey thing. There's a difference between the cap hit and the salary owed. And I feel like what some of these owners would want is that, no, I'm definitely with you in terms of, I think the Ravens, the Jets, the Packers are all holding teams up right now in terms of some of these skill position guys not being dealt. But what I think it could be is that I think teams would find more value of, if you go halfway through this next season with DeAndre Hopkins on the Cardinals, they've already paid him his bonus for this season. They've already paid him a good chunk of the salary for this season. So then all you would have to worry about is the remainder of 2023 and then 2024. And there might be some negotiating done with the 2024 salary as well. I feel like, again, I don't think this gets blatantly spoken about in the NFL in terms of that. But again, from a hockey perspective, that's where I'm taking this from. That is a big deal a lot of the times in some of the trade deadline deals with stuff like that happens in terms of like, guy gets traded, what's his cap hit, what's the remaining salary, how much bonus money is left, do we need to immediately pay that? Like, those all are very much taken into consideration. Like, when we talk about who is the general manager's boss, it's the owners. And owners, even an owner that is considered a good owner and not that meddlesome, at the end of the day, it's still their pocketbooks, and they have to be told, like, hey, this is what the deal is. And if they sign off on it, great. And if they don't, I'm sorry, why? Like, probably the Cardinals in this case, they could also be holding those up to be like, why would I want to pay X amount of money for a guy who's not going to be on my team anymore? It could also be that at the end of the day, right? And maybe on both sides, it's a lot better for a year and a half left compared to 2 full seasons left. So I think DeAndre Hopkins should have already been traded. And because he hasn't been, I think he's going to get traded more closer to the deadline, which, I mean, is great for us. It's going to make the regular season more entertaining come that time of the year. So, I mean, like, this is setting up our podcast for giving us stuff to talk about. Maybe low-key thank you to the Arizona Cardinals for being so bad at this that you're helping out the show. And moving on. So that's all the wide receivers that we're taking care of on this article, at least the ones that we're going to talk about. That's all the defensive players that we're going to stand to talk about. We are not going to talk about Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson until they actually get moved. I think we're just about sick of it on the show, unless you have any conjecture to speak about here real quick, Justin. Any?
Just do it already.
Thank you. All right. And the last thing we're going to talk about, running backs. There are 4 running backs on this list, Justin, who could potentially get dealt. We will do this relatively quick between the both of us. We're going to play if trade or stay. Is this guy going to get traded, or is he going to end up staying on his team? So let's start with Austin Ekeler. Trade or stay?
I think stay. I think that he is not on the Chargers the next year, but they seem to be very stubborn with this. I mean, they just went through it with Melvin Gordon, 4 or 5 years ago. So I think they end up keeping him. He plays for cheap, and he'll get moved, or he'll move himself.
I feel you. he might move himself. I will go with stay as well, but I want to think that they should be getting a deal reworked with him, in part because I think part of it is with Justin Herbert, because he's going to be due his contract. That, yes, it's going to be a very, very high cap hit, but I think, you look at some of these other teams that have been able to, work around the salary cap so much. I think that, like, Chargers, you have no excuse. You should be able to find a way. For a guy who had the season that Austin Ekeler had in terms of, his ability to just catch passes out the backfield, but also his total touchdown production this past season, they got to figure it out, to say the very least, in my opinion. So I will say stay. I'm going to very passively hope they're able to work out a contract extension with Ekeler, to say the very least, or at least rework his deal. Because I think he's got, I believe, 2 years left on the deal, if I'm not mistaken. So if it's 2 years left and maybe you tack on 2 more and you rework the money, I think you should be able to figure it out. But again, I hope for that. I hope as Ekeler gets paid, I hope that they're able to work it out, because he's a big weapon for Justin Herbert, at the very least. All right, that's running back 1. Running back number 2 on this list. This isn't necessarily in the order it is. I'm just going in my own order because I run it. Josh Jacobs, Justin, stay or trade?
I think stay. Again, this is another guy that I don't know if they get a long-term deal done. I'd like to think that they don't, because I don't want to see Josh Jacobs stuck there. I think that he would be very interesting to see if he can have that same kind of production on another team, but he is absolutely vital to that McDaniels offense. I mean, he was easily the most utilized player on that team last year. And they are going to need him to have the same season he had last year if they want any kind of production out of Jimmy Garoppolo and Devontae Adams. So I'm going to say he stays. I don't think that there's anything in the league barring, a superstar quarterback or something outrageous that they would trade him for. So I think he stays there.
I'm with you. I say stay as well. I don't think they'll get a long-term deal done, unlike what I think could happen with Eckler. I think it'll probably just be him playing out on the franchise tag. I know part of the reason why it's kind of gone this way is because I think Jacobs, he just literally had a career season. This is a guy that wants to get paid. This guy who's had some injury issues, and obviously maybe some teams are obviously cognizant of that, and that's why he hasn't got the long-term deal. But I think if
you remember though, he's got that kind of he's got that image. But we looked. He's never really missed more than 3 games in a season.
No, agree. So the reason why I bring it up is because I know he hasn't missed games, but I think it's the idea of the lingering / nagging.
He's got some sort of nagging thing where they're like, all right, maybe we'll limit his carries that day or something like that. You're right.
Exactly. Even though this is allegedly supposed to be the sport where guys get praised for playing through injuries, not when it comes to contract negotiations, to say the very least. That's been proven in the NFL. So I'm with you. I think Josh Jacobs. Huh?
The fans praise you.
Yeah, the fans praise you, except if you're Baker Mayfield. So I think Josh Jacobs stays. I don't think they get a long-term deal worked out with him, at least during the season. I think if they somehow work something with him, it'll be next offseason. I think there might be. I think Josh Jacobs could view this as very much okay, F you, pay me season, and he's gonna run his heart out to try to get what's very much deserving of him, because. So these next 2 running backs on this list, they've already been paid, and Josh Jacobs certainly wants to join that list. All right, Dalvin Cook, Justin, stay or trade?
This is another one that's very interesting. I'm gonna say he is stay. They are gonna do everything they can to keep that band together and try and get that defense right, because last year they were a prolific offense. No matter how much you hate Kirk Cousins, they put up a lot of points, they put up a lot of yards. They were a very good offense last year, and they really lost a lot of those games on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm going to say they're going to keep him. They're going to try and get that band together for one more good offensive season, and maybe they'll be able to fix that defense before their time runs out.
Perhaps. I'm with you. I'm going to say a similar thing. I'm going to say stay, because I kind of boring for people. But I just think you mentioned my disdain of Kirk Cousins. I think hate's a little bit of a strong word, Justin. Part of the reason.
Disdain?
What?
But you use disdain?
Yeah, disdain.
That's not worse than hate. Whatever. Go on.
I think on the scale, I think there's disdain for someone, and I think hatred is like a tier above it. I think like hatred is like you're getting there. That there's. We'll make this tier list one day. To me, there's disdain is on one of the lower, is like the lower half, maybe teetering into the upper half, and then like hatred and vitriol is like those upper tier emotions of it. But irregardless of what you might think my emotions for Kirk Cousins are, I think Dalvin Cook staying there helps Kirk Cousins. I think that helps this team. So I'm going to say stay, because I think if they trade him, like, yes, there could be the idea that you clear up the cap space over the next couple seasons would be big, because he is, as of now, due $14 million each of the next 3 seasons. And while the idea that Alexander Mattison can very much do a good enough job for the Minnesota Vikings, I think the playmaking ability of Dalvin Cook is very much able to is very much a plus for Kirk Cousins. Is very much a plus for that team, especially because they just cut Adam Thielen. Like, I think you need to try to keep if the offense is what has helped you the last few seasons, like, you kind of have to try to keep that band relatively together, because Justin Jefferson can't be doing everything by himself next season. Unless you're going to start giving Justin Jefferson rushing touches, then, oh dear God, they're going to break that man's body.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully not. So I also will stay with him. And he might also be like the only one of these guys that definitively I think will probably be there past this season, in part because of his contract. He's due a couple years left. Would someone be willing to take that on next season, where some of the teams that might need running back will probably have running back fulfilled come next year? Who knows? Maybe he gets dealt, maybe not. All right, last guy on this list. It's very interesting, Justin. Derrick Henry. Now, this obviously is something interesting. He's entering a contract season. I never realized that his contract that he signed a couple years ago was that fast. But Derrick Henry,
3 or 4 years, I think. It was short.
Yeah, it was a short. Maybe because I keep thinking it literally just happened last year, but it definitely didn't. It happened several years ago. But yes, 2023 is the final year of his deal. There are some void years after this, but obviously, That's from all the salary cap reworking. So he'll be a free agent properly next season. Derrick Henry, Tennessee Titans, team we've talked about plenty on the show. Team that maybe we could bump up in that scale. I think they're a little bit above disdain for me personally. But that guy's been the centerpiece of this team for the last couple seasons. We've seen what happens when Derrick Henry misses time. They're just not the same. And the impact he has. Stay or trade. I think this one's pretty obvious, Justin. I think he's staying. If they are going to if the Tennessee Titans are going to be keeping Ryan Tannehill, or even if it's Malik Willis taking charge next season at some point, they need Derrick Henry to be the centerpiece of that team because they still don't have enough skill position talent to make up for it. He is the engine of this team. If they somehow traded him this offseason, they're going to be like a 3-4 win team next season. I don't even think that's an argument. So I say stay because they're going to convince themselves to give it one more go.
That's a fair take. It's probably the smart take. I'm going to say trade.
Ooh, okay. I like it.
I think that to give it one more year is foolish. I think Tannehill's still under contract, correct?
Yes.
But I don't think that he's the answer there long term, obviously. I think that they had a very rough season offensively last year. They were not healthy down the stretch. You have a new GM there. I think the coach is going to be out. What's his name?
Mike Vrabel.
Mike Vrabel, yeah. A great coach, don't get me wrong. I love him. I'm a Vrabel guy. I don't think he lasts there just because new GM's going to want to bring in their own guy. And you are going to want to acquire as many draft picks as possible. I think that there is a good chance that the Titans try and either move up in this draft for a quarterback or tank next season for a quarterback. And to do that, you are going to need to trade Derrick Henry while he still has some value. He was still a 1,000-yard back last year, even with missing the last 2 games of the season, I think. He's still got plenty left in the tank. And I think that you could probably get a first-round pick for him for the right team. If you packaged Derrick Henry in the 10 or what are they, the 11?
Yeah, I believe so.
I think that would be an excellent trade package to move up to a team like maybe the Cardinals, who have not had health at the running back position and don't need a quarterback this year. So
right.
That would be an interesting trade, and I would vote for that. I'd love to see Derrick Henry and James Conner and Kyler Murray under center. That would be, you wouldn't know which way the ball was going, but right. It would be passed. Yeah.
Well, I will say this. Ryan Tannehill is also in a contract year because I wanted to check that really fast. He's also in a contract season. So
they thought that maybe he would have that he would be a trade candidate as well. But the Titans have come out and said no.
Who the hell's going to trade him for that? But yeah, it could be either or. I definitely don't blame you. If I had to go back and maybe change one of the stay or keeps that I've said, I probably actually would reconsider the Dalvin Cook portion of it because it's the Vikings, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just traded him. And I'm with you. I think Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry are two guys that teams that feel a running back would just be a perfect fit into the system would be massive. It's funny that you actually mentioned the Cardinals. Because I think, now this all depends on if they're healthy this season, but if you're talking about a team that could use some running back support for their quarterback, I think the Los Angeles Rams could be a team that might consider one of the last 2 guys on this list. Because I think the Rams, you were mentioning them with Courtland Sutton. I agree. I think skill position could be that, but could they also be a team that maybe they try to give a little more go of Al Robinson? Maybe they use their third round pick, or if they somehow can keep their second round pick, maybe they perhaps use that to get a rookie wide receiver. And then they trade for one of these veteran running backs. And then ipso facto, you get that veteran running back to help out because the running game has been, funny enough, at the very beginning of the Sean McVay era, the running game was what carried this team. And now the running game is all but done. Whereas it's Cooper Kupp being the absolute beast. If you get one of these running backs to pair up with Cooper Kupp, just in terms of skill position, it's pretty good in LA, and I can help you out.
The only reason I didn't say LA, because, I actually did. I said, if you remember a couple weeks ago, I did say that they would trade for Austin Eckler. I think they would because he catches the ball out of the backfield. Sean McVay loves a good pounding running back that can jam the ball down your throat. And Derrick Henry would fit there like a glove. And I know I've been saying the Rams trade their draft picks, but I don't necessarily think it's the right move for them. They've gone with this all in or nothing kind of mentality the last few years. And while it did work out, they won a Super Bowl.
It caught up to them.
To do it for a running back is hurting your team.
Mhm.
Not only because you don't know the production you're going to get out of the next year of a running back, because running back shelf lives are low.
Right.
Trading these draft picks had an obvious effect on them last year, in which they had no depth. When they were injured, the veterans had to pick up extra slack, and then that hurt them. And they didn't. They had no depth at their positions. So they need to get a little younger. I would say that the Rams are a team that would be primed to sell as of right now. If you think that you have a veteran, I mean, they traded Jalen Ramsey, for God's sakes.
No, that's true. And they did cut Bobby Wagner.
Exactly. It looks like Allen Robinson will be out there. You know, there's lots of players there that I would say are still viable, and they will likely be sellers at the trade deadline this year, I think. Especially because I do think that Stafford Cup connection still has a couple of years left. They could squeeze some juice out of it. They could use some linemen still. They definitely could use some running backs. Akers has not worked out there. Even if they've decided to go long-term with him, I don't think it's going to work out for them in the long run. They could use some receivers. They could use some linemen. They could use a running back. And they could still use some depth on their defense. So look for them to sell, try and get some draft picks, and maybe put themselves in a position where they can trade a first-round pick again for a sure thing, and maybe put themselves back in Super Bowl contention.
Yeah, maybe. We got to check and see when the hell their next first-round pick is, because I have no idea. All right, so that does it for all the draft day deals we're talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, unless you think that that took a while, unless you think that we're done with the show because, Xfinity decided to have a little bit of fun with us earlier. Au contraire, mon frere, we not done. We got our 2022 NFL draft look back. It is the main event of the show now. Well, actually, technically speaking, the main event / closing of the show is usually the rant podium. But yeah, this is the perfect setup for that. Our 2022 NFL draft look back. Of course, next week, guys, is our mock draft, our 3-round mock. We're excited. We did a 3-round mock last year. And now we're going back all the way, a little bit of a look back to the first round. Again, first round only of last year's 2022 draft. And we do everything in threes here on the show. So we have our analysis between us are three picks that we each have selected from last year's first round that were hits, absolute home runs, day one, A1. These guys performed for their teams and did great. Me and Justin have our picks, but before we get to that, Justin, you already know what I'm going to do. I think everybody knows what I'm going to do at this point. Let's start out with
internet connection.
What happened?
Lose internet connection?
Looking about 3 first-round hits from last year's draft. And again, I want to go a little bit off the beaten path. I'm going to let, Jurg and Justin talk a bit about the guys that I think they're going to talk about. But I want to start off by talking about Charles Cross, who was the number 9 overall pick. This was a pick that Justin hit on in our draft last year. Seattle, their young offensive line did wonders. And it wasn't just Charles Cross. It was Abraham Lucas, who they picked up in the 3rd round, I believe. But Cross has shown that he's just an incredible athlete and really did a nice job protecting Geno Smith there, which I think was a godsend that Seattle did so well because Geno was there doing really well, and that offensive line held up quite nicely for him. So that was a big home run for Seattle for what they needed. I think the second hit for me is Jahan Dotson for the Commanders. And look, we talked about it last year in the post-draft. It was an odd choice to go for him that high, but he was high on their board for a reason. The guy nearly had 40 catches, 7 touchdowns. He always seemed to be open for a big play in the red zone. And he really made the Commanders a much better team I think a lot of people wanted to talk about. They're not my team anymore, and that's okay, because, when you get rid of Taylor Heineke, you lose my vote. But I think Jahan Dotson had an excellent year, and it was a great wide receiver class for the first year, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, and I'll talk about them in later videos. And the third name on my list, Devin Lloyd, the linebacker who went to the Jaguars in the late first round out of Utah. I mean, the guy had 100-plus tackles and was a force. That Jaguars team was a tackling machine. And Devin Lloyd was one of the best linebackers coming out of this draft. I think the Jaguars did a really nice job hitting on that pick because you saw Nakobe Dean slide. Devin Lloyd was right there, and they needed the linebacker, so they took him, and it was a perfect fit for that system. So those are my 3 hits from the 2022 NFL Draft.
No, not lose internet. Thank you very much for that joke, Justin. You think that Xfinity is going to fail me twice in one show? They might actually. They still could.
I was going to say, do you not?
They probably will. But, while I'm still here, at least, and while we can have the conversation, 3 great picks right there by Rick. Like Rick said, we're trying to be a little bit different. Obviously, we could talk about the topics of the draft, which, I mean, if we're desperate, we might have to. But there were some hits later on in the draft, and he brings up 3 really good pieces right there. Did he take any of yours really quick, Justin, before we continue?
No.
No? You know what? Funny enough, same. Didn't take any of mine either. So we got 3 fresh guys. I think I agree with all 3 that he mentioned. I mean, Dotson, I'm kind of 50-50 on because I think he has the talent and I think he had a solid rookie season. It wasn't the best compared to the other wide receivers that were taken there. That's the only one I'm kind of 50-50 on, but I don't know if I would necessarily call him a miss. There's another wide receiver in this class that I would call a miss before I call Jahan Dotson a miss in that first round.
I wonder which one.
Meh. Anyways, that's called foreshadowing. But other than Jahan Dotson, that you could flip a coin on that. I'm with him. I think Devin Lloyd. We were confused that Kobe Dean ended up falling out the first round, but Devin Lloyd was still very much worth it. He was actually a guy that we were very high on, Justin, going into the pre-draft process. That we thought whatever team that was going to draft him, you get a great linebacker there to help you out in the field. And Devin Lloyd certainly proved that was a great young piece for a Jacksonville Jaguars defense that needs young pieces on that team. Funny enough, we were kind of mentioning them earlier without even trying. So there we go. But yeah, Devin Lloyd I think was great. And overall, yeah, I can't really disagree with his 3 selections there. And like you said, Charles Cross, you called it last year. I think we all agreed that Charles Cross going to Seattle was a great pick, and it worked out for them to say the very least. So that being said, Justin, let's go over your 3 hits real quick.
I mean, there's so many people to pick from, but obviously I think I'm going to go with my guy, Sauce Gardner.
Fair enough.
He had one of the best rookie seasons for a corner of all time. He came in highly touted, and it worked. I mean, it was one of the better jet picks that we've seen in a long time. It's obviously one of the better jet drafts that we've ever seen in a long time, especially because of his partners in the first round, Garrett Wilson and Jermaine Johnson the second. So yeah, that was a great pick. I'm not going to take up all of my Jets picks. I could, in theory, pick all 3. I could definitely pick the first 2. Jermaine Johnson, obviously not as productive as the other 2 guys, but I'll kind of pair that in because Garrett Wilson, obviously also the offensive rookie of the year. The second guy I'm going to give my props to is Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, a guy who was clearly, in my mind, should have been the first overall pick. He had a fantastic year in Detroit. It was a quiet year because realistically their defense as a whole wasn't the best, but he really came in. He made some noise. He was an excellent player for them. Really got after the quarterback, finished with 9.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries, as I have said multiple times already in this episode. Great pick for the Detroit Lions. They have done wonders with their first-round draft picks the last few years, and I'm excited to see what they do this year because that team seems to be going nowhere but up. And the third one I'm going to go with is Chris Olave with the New Orleans Saints. Olave, again, unfortunately, one of those guys that had the injury bug at points throughout the season. But let me tell you, he had an excellent rookie year. He broke 1,000 yards. He had 72 catches. He had 4 receiving touchdowns. And if I'm not mistaken, he missed the last 3 games of the year.
I believe so, yeah.
Hopefully he can come back healthy again next year. He's going to have a new quarterback. He's going to have a more consistent quarterback next year, we hope. But yeah, look for Chris Olave to take another step next year.
I like that. Olave was one of my guys, but thankfully I wrote down several names, so I'm not hurting for that. That's really good there. No, you're good. I'm with you on all 3 of your guys. I think, you mentioned Sauce Gardner there, and you kind of gave props to Garrett Wilson. You took my Ohio State wide receiver, so let me take that one real quick. Let me start with my 3. Chris Olave was certainly great. Garrett Wilson, there's a reason why he won Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was just a little bit better. Absolute star wideout for the New York Jets this season, really proving that he has some high potential. And I mean, it showed day one. Like, could you imagine if you give him Justin, could you imagine the season that Garrett Wilson had? He had over 1,000 yards as a rookie. He wins Offensive Rookie of the Year. He had that with Zach Wilson and Mike White and Joe Flacco as his quarterback. Could you imagine, just theorize this, Justin? I know this is a completely improbable scenario here. Could you imagine if you give Garrett Wilson, I don't know, like maybe a quarterback that's made a couple All-Pro teams and maybe has won an MVP award or two in his career, throwing him the football? Just imagine what that could be like for Garrett Wilson. I think that could be a pretty good scenario.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what he could have done? Maybe he could have, had an extra 400 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Maybe, and it would have even been better. But no, in all seriousness, my joking aside, Garrett Wilson was certainly phenomenal for the Jets last season, definitively locking himself in as one of the top 2 receivers on that team for the future. If he's currently number 1, which he kind of is on the depth chart, or if they end up getting a receiver better than him that they pair up, Garrett Wilson is one of the pillars of the Jets offense for years to come. And he was absolutely phenomenal last season. And, he's also proving he can be maybe a pretty good recruiter as well during the offseason here, Justin. So Garrett Wilson is certainly my number 1. My number 2, I got to give props to this team for, being able to draft this guy. They have 2 first-round picks. I could go with either of their 2 first-round picks, but let me go with the defensive side of things here. Kyle Hamilton, the Baltimore Ravens, Kyle Hamilton was supremely talented. He kind of fell in the draft for whatever reason. I don't think he should have fallen as far as he did, but Baltimore was like, "Oh, thank you very much for giving us a foundational piece of the defense." I think he had a great rookie season for the Ravens. I think it was in part he filled a need for them because they hit a complete reset button at the safety position. But I think there was a good, at least for 5 picks in a row, he was the best player available. And when you get to mix best player available and need for yourself in one selection, that's great. I think Kyle Hamilton was pretty good last season. There was an injury bug. I don't know how many games he missed off the top of my head, but I know he got a little bit dinged up because it felt like every single Baltimore Ravens defensive player was banged up at some point last season. But I think overall, Kyle Hamilton had a good rookie season. He had a solid rookie season. And I think year 2 is more to come from him. Absolutely great. It could have been him or Tyler Linderbaum for my pick here because Tyler Linderbaum proved that he's going to be the center for a very long time for the Baltimore Ravens in this league. He was absolutely talented as well. But I got to give some love to Kyle Hamilton there. But let me not go away from the offensive line too much. This is a guy who I feel like it's very weird because I had to read up on this. But Tyler Smith for the Dallas Cowboys, Justin, he was a little bit of a surprise selection for them with their first-round pick. I know he had some issues either early or late in the season when it came to some holding penalties, which you would like to see that get cleaned up very much. But he filled in more than admirably for the Dallas Cowboys. Remember, Tyrone Smith missed a lot of time last season for that team, and they asked him to have to step into the role and be the franchise left tackle for at least a little bit when their actual franchise left tackle was out. He played left tackle. He played guard. I think he may have played both guard spots for a bit last season, more so left guard. Tyler Smith proved himself for the Dallas Cowboys last season. For all the criticizing and people were making jokes about, why would the Dallas Cowboys pick him? Dallas Cowboys hit with a first-round pick on an offensive lineman yet again here. Tyler Smith was very good. Where he is this season is going to be a question because Tyron Smith is back in the fold. I think I've read things saying that they want to put him at one of the guard spots, probably left guard. But, I mean, unless a better offensive lineman comes in a future draft here, I think the Dallas Cowboys might be able to say they have the replacement for Tyron Smith already on the roster here with Tyler Smith. I think he played absolutely phenomenal for them last season. Had to fill in, I think, in a bigger role than what was expected in terms of the position. And I think he did a good enough job. He got critiqued a little bit. And again, I do think he could maybe clean up the holding a little bit. But I think overall, good job overall for him for his rookie season. For a guy that was a bit criticized to have the year he had for that organization, Tyler Smith is my third hit of last year's first round. So that's my take on it. I agree with your 3. What do you think of my 3?
I love it, actually. I was actually looking at Tyler Smith's season as you brought him up. I thought he was a great play for them. It's the reason that they were able to release Lyle Collins last year, who obviously was not getting the job done there. So, it's great 3 guys.
Thank you. Now the question is by chance any of the 3 guys that we've mentioned on one of Rick's misses here? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we just talked about our home run hits, and now we have our 3 misses. Real quick, Justin, yes or no? Do you think one of our hits is going to be on his misses?
I'd like to think so.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I always agree with what Rick has to say.
I don't know why. I'm having a feeling that either Smith or even somehow Kyle Hamilton will be one of his misses. I don't know why.
Now on to our 3 misses for this NFL draft. I'm going to start off with a pretty high miss, Derek Stingley. Now, a lot of this has to do with the fact that Sauce Gardner was picked right after him and blew away the Rookie of the Year voting. But so did Tariq Woolen. Tariq Woolen was a 5th-round pick and outperformed Derek Stingley Jr., I think, this season. Now, again, it might have been a case where he was picked really high for a system that didn't really need a cornerback or wasn't really going to be good this year. but at least contribute in some capacity. And I don't think he did that. So I think Derek Stingley was a miss. Maybe this year will be better for him, but I'm not so sure about that. My second miss, I know we talked about the wide receivers glowingly in the last video, but Traylon Burks was the miss for me. Great body, great, physical specimen, had a lot of problems in training camp and just didn't really appear to be the guy that they wanted to have in the first round. Now, keep in mind, that was really the trade-off. Oh, they got rid of A.J. Brown, so here's Traylon Burks. You thought he'd be better, and he really wasn't. And again, a lot of that's not his fault. The injuries are what they are, and the asthma is what it is. In all seriousness, we hope that, Traylon Burks has a good second year and does well, but not really first-round caliber talent, I think. And I was going to tempted to go with Quay Walker for the Packers. Had a really good year, but his disciplinary measures were a little questionable for me. But I'm going to go with a teammate of his that was also picked in the first round. That's Devontae Wyatt. The Packers needed somebody better on the defensive line. And Devontae Wyatt wasn't exactly the guy that had the greatest of seasons for Green Bay. I think Green Bay needed something else. They needed a guy with a better motor, maybe a George Karlaftis, or even one of the outside linebackers who went later in the second round, like an Arnold Ebiketie, or even a Drake Jackson or a Josh Pascal might have been better than Devontae Wyatt. He just underperformed this year, and I think that was why he was a big miss. So those are my three misses.
Didn't have any of ours. I'm more impressed. He did take two of mine, so thanks, Rick.
Yeah, he took. I had a few of those guys on my misses as well.
All three?
Well, I'll not anymore, but yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I was about to ask before we get to it, was Derek Stingley one of your misses as well? Because we could talk about that. No? Okay. I was going to say, even
he had a decent year last year. I mean, you're right. If you're going to compare him to Sauce Gardner and
Tariq Woolen.
Yeah, then he's a miss.
My thing with the Tariq Woolen comparison is, again, I don't know, was Stingley more of a man-to-man or a coverage corner to you going into last draft, Justin?
To me, he was a coverage guy. I mean, he played a lot of man-to-man in college, and I think you kind of expected him to do a little bit more of that this year. But to me, I assumed he would just his injuries and his other and his struggles the year before, because if you remember his top year, that was in 2019.
Yeah,
when he had a great year, and then he was injured his final year in college, and then the second year they said he looked kind of like, I don't know, like bored or something. I don't know, but he hasn't played at that elite level for 2 years. So he came in, he had 43 tackles and a sack. And an
interception.
He played okay. Yeah, it's just, he's clearly an NFL caliber player. If you're going to compare him to other first round guys, then I don't necessarily think he's the top guy,
right?
Especially for someone that went number one in his position.
Very, very true. And maybe part of it is just at the end of the day, he was the guy that the Texans decided to go with before the Jets ended up picking Sauce Gardner. And you could say, sometimes it's unfair for, and I would say is something that I've been saying more, life's not always fair, guys. That's just how it goes. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we would all be a lot happier, but that's not the case. And that's just what you have to live with. But I think Stingley will hopefully have a good year too. I still have some faith in him. The kid was, like you said, Justin, this kid has been highly touted. Like people were thinking that waiting for him to make the NFL since he was a college freshman. Like he had a lot of hype behind him. And like you said, he suffered injuries in college. There was some, I don't know if Ed Orgeron was fired before he ended up leaving, but he had some coach turnover there. Now he's already having coach turnover in the NFL. I think that could affect a young player if they're put in that situation too many times. So we'll see. And again, he's very young, like Sauce Gardner. He's 21 years old. Stingley's not going to become 22 until like June. So he's got a lot of time to say the very least. But I'm not going to say it's a hard disagree. I think I'm kind of with Jahan, like on the Jahan Dotson thing. Like I could see the argument of calling it a miss, but I don't know if I would. I think there are other misses in this draft that you can make that argument for, like two of the guys that he mentioned there. So let me just go really quick with mine because I didn't have too many other names on this list for me. So let me just expand upon what Rick talked about. Yeah, I'm with him in terms of the two misses that he has in terms of Traylon Burks and Devontae Wyatt. I think, Quay Walker, I definitely understand what Rick was talking about with the disciplinary stuff, but I think if you try to put that aside, I think maybe with the veterans that are still on the defensive side of things, I think those could get cleaned up with Quay Walker. I think he had a very good rookie season, to say the very least, for the Packers. They really loved taking Georgia defensive players in the first round in the last couple of years. But Devontae Wyatt, I don't think was big. I understand that they need to get a defensive tackle that would maybe more so be a run stuffer next to Clark there on the defensive side of things, but just Wyatt he didn't fulfill that role to the level that they would have expected of him as quickly as it was. Because at the end of the day, I know unfair, but at the same time, you have to do it. When Aaron Rodgers was on the team, there was a timeline. And these young kids, they either had to sink or swim. And, Quay Walker, I think, swam really well. I think Christian Watson in the second half of the season was great. I think Romeo Doubs had moments. I think Wyatt was probably the worst of their draft picks, of their first 4 or 5 draft picks that they made last season. And it sucks to say because I think he technically fits a role for them. He just didn't perform great at that role last season. And Trey Burks, my heart goes out for him because if only he had a real quarterback to throw him the ball there in Tennessee. And I say this for both the starting and the backup quarterback because Ryan Tannehill was overrated and Malik Willis just couldn't really throw the ball that well when you actually saw him out there. So hopefully you get a little bit of progression if we see more Malik Willis here this season, or Ryan Tannehill is actually able to throw consistently to a weapon that doesn't have the last name Brown on their jersey. And maybe he could have a good second year. Again, I think also Treylon Burks going into last season, I think he had to catch up to things physically. I don't think he was necessarily physically ready for the NFL. There was some talk about him having to fix his body. So I think from that perspective, do you need to get that real quick?
No, I don't know who's here.
Well, Justin might have a situation there on that end. I think Treylon Burks could hopefully have a better second year. I think things will work out better. And if I'm not mistaken, I think not at the middle of the season. Did he have an injury at the start of the season that he was just rehabbing, Justin, a lingering injury, or was it just what I'm talking about? What I'm assuming Treylon Burks was one of your guys that you had as a miss. So do you want
no, because I knew he's a Titan and that would be on your list. So I didn't know him. He did have a number of lingering injuries. I believe he's also one of those guys. I think he's got asthma. So that affected him quite a bit. And then I think he had an ankle injury at points.
Right.
So he did miss some time. He was disappointing. He never really kind of blossomed into that top target that they were hoping that he would be in replacement of AJ Brown. Not to say that he's not someone who can do that. He's got the physical tools. It's just kind of could be some outside factors like quarterback and offensive line play, and it could be
an offensive play calling.
And it could be some of his own issues due to injuries and other things like that. So
very, very much so.
Maybe
definitely
take another step this year.
Yeah, maybe. And my last guy here, just because I listed 2 out of my 3 already. Trevor Penning at the Saints at 19. Again, a little bit unfair for the kid, but drafted 19th overall, only played in 6 games, only got 1 start this season. He had 2 different injuries. He entered the season already injured, got better, was able to play a little bit, and then he ended the season injured. So I know just a lot of bad luck there. And again, I feel for the kid. I didn't want to put him on here because he suffered through so much injury. But if we're doing a 1-year report card, we do have to grade a little bit on the fact that he wasn't able to be out there healthy enough for this team. That being said, if he should be healthy this season, I think the good thing is that he's going to be on the opposite side of Ryan Ramczyk, which I think, them as a tackle combination is nice. They still got Cesar Ruiz on the interior and McCoy as well, although I believe Ruiz is going to be doing a contract this season. So maybe this could be a big year for Penning to be able to prove himself. Maybe he gets shifted into guard spot after this season rather than the tackle spot to replace Ruiz if Ruiz ends up leaving. I think this is a big year for Trevor Penning to just be able to play. So I think the more fair grade, if we do this again next season potentially, and we probably will also do this for this 2023 class, so perform well, guys. But I think that, again, unfair a little bit. But if we have to go based off of 1 year, yes, Trevor Penning is obviously going to be on one of the misses because he just didn't play. And injuries are a part of the game to an extent at the end of the day. So I got to put Trevor Penning there. But again, he could perform well. And if this team is going to potentially have a massive need at the offensive line a year from now, if he performs in 2023, hey, you only make it better and you completely turn things around. But for now, I got to list Trevor Penning as one of my misses for this 2023 NFL draft class for the first round. So those are my 3 misses. Justin, what are yours?
So if we're going to do it the way that we've been doing it, the first one has got to be Trayvon Walker. Again, not a bad player. he had his moments in the 2022-2023 season, but he wasn't the number one guy. I know he's physically got those immeasurables and they love his personality and he's a hard worker, but for you to pass up on guys like Aiden Hutchinson and even Sauce Gardner, Kayvon Thibodeau, like guys that really came on towards the end of the year, it didn't make a lot of sense for them to take him number one overall. My next guy, as I lose track of where I am, my next guy that was a bit disappointing. I don't know. All my guys were taken. Let's take a look here. I would say it's probably got to be Treylon Burks. You're right. He struggled throughout the year. And again, it's a guy that had those physical tools that should have been, unmatched. I mean, who was he competing with for targets there? It was Robert Woods, who was coming off a major injury, and that was pretty much it. And he still really couldn't get open. He didn't have a lot of production, and they're in a lot of trouble offensively there. And the third guy that I would probably say is probably going to be Ike Ekwonu, a highly touted guy. He could play multiple positions on the offensive line. He didn't have a bad season. He played well, but it's another one of those guys that when you have Charles Cross on and Trevor Penning and like all of these guys that have come in, started 17 games and played well, obviously not Penning, but there's
Evan Neal. Evan Neal, I think, went right after him.
So. Evan Neal went right after him too, who also, I believe, struggled in the beginning. But look, there was a stretch, I think, between like week 2 and like week 10 where Ike Ekwonu didn't give up a sack. But he also had 14 penalties called on the year. There were times where he didn't really it didn't look like he knew where he was supposed to be, where he's supposed to line up. Maybe that's a coaching thing. But it's just for the top tackle taken, I don't know. It just seems like a little bit of a disappointment. I don't want to, condemn anyone on their first year. This was definitely harder for me than it was to choose guys that succeeded. But yeah, to me, I don't know if he deserved to be the number one tackle off the board.
Right. I'm with you, and I think that's a very fair assessment there. I'm with you, Justin. It was hard for me to pick 3 guys definitively that would have also been different because, I mean, Rick mentioned a couple of guys that were taken later in the draft. You went to the top. I went kind of more in the middle to later. Like, there were a lot of good picks in this draft, man. Like, again, year one, some of these guys might flail out. Some of these guys might come back and have a great season. Like, we can only judge so much from what we saw on the tape. But for what we've seen, this is what we have to go with. And I'm kind of with you. I think Ekwonu, I think he had a good rookie season, but the idea, I think what you mentioned, the perception of who was taken around / after you, of Charles Cross being a franchise tackle for the Seahawks definitively, Evan Neal on that offensive line, he doesn't have to worry about being the left tackle because that's Andrew Thomas's job. Maybe that, if Ekwonu maybe would have gone to that role more so, because I think between him and Moton, there's a difference between a Taylor Moton being your other tackle and Andrew Thomas being your other tackle. Moton's good, but Andrew Thomas, really broke out to be the franchise guy for the Giants this season. So I think that Ekwonu, again, a lot of future for sure. And is going to be a big part of that Panthers offensive line here. I think this is going to be a big great year for him because now you're bringing in the franchise tackle that he has to protect, man. And you got to, if last season, if you had some of those problems, you got to clean that all up this season because this is the season. Depends on when the rookie QB ends up starting, what week they go. But it's all go, no show this year. You got to be ready to go from day one because at the end of the day, at some point this season, the future of the Panthers franchise is going to be playing there, and you got to protect them. Simple as that. So, but no, I'm with you. I don't think Ekwonu's necessarily. I think it's a miss because of other circumstances aside from his play. Yes, the penalties need to be cleaned up, but I think there are other circumstances that you would argue maybe make him a miss. I think if we just go based solely on play, I think again he fits in the Jahan Dotson, Derek Stingley mold, where I think you could go either or with that. So I'm definitely with you on that aspect of things. All right. Those are hits and misses. Before we get to our grade, we got to go real quick here with 3 guys that should have been first-round picks. These are guys that were drafted later in the draft that hindsight 2020 probably could have been picked higher. So let's go to Rick first and see who he has on his list.
3 guys that should have been picked in the first round. Well, I'll do 2, and then I'm going to do one sneaky, cheetah pick a little bit. my first one, not just because they are my new team, and in case you're wondering, by the way, I am all set for our NFL mock draft next year. This is my lovely Cole Kmet jersey, which has just come in. Go Bears. Mwah. Jaquan Brisker is my first, should have been in the top 32 picks. A lot of it has to do with the fact that Lewis Cine did get hurt. It's an unfortunate thing, but Jaquan Brisker had 100-plus tackles for a Bears defense that, look, the Bears were not going to be world beaters last year, but Brisker showed that he was unafraid of getting physical, and that's huge for a safety. He was a second-round pick. I think it could have gone mid-tier first round, which would have been, spectacular for him, but he had a really good year otherwise. Second for me is Tyler Allgeier, and if you remember our draft show last year, I mentioned him being a third-round pick to the Patriots, because I said he's a guy that will probably be a bruiser and a really good running back. And what did he do for the Falcons? He got over 1,000 yards rushing, and he was absolutely the game changer that they needed on that offensive side. With Cordero Patterson there too, they needed a bell cow back, and that's what Allgeier was. I think, there weren't a lot of running backs that were drafted this year, none in the first round. So Allgeier absolutely would have fit that mold. He should have been a first-round guy, no question in my mind. The last one, like I said, it's a bit of a cheat, but I'm going to say that a guy who went undrafted really should have been drafted. And Jurg, you'll love this. Ryan Stonehouse out of Colorado State, the punter, who went to Tennessee, undrafted and broke 2 or 3 records, including one that was an 82-year-old mark from Sammy Baugh. I think it was punt yards average. He averaged 53 yards a punt this season. How do you not draft this guy? I'm not saying he's going to go first round like Sebastian Janikowski did, but he's the best punter out of college in years, and he didn't get drafted. That's a big missed opportunity for all 31 of those teams that didn't take him. The Titans did. They reaped the benefits, but they were also terrible on offense, so you win some, you lose some. But Ryan Stonehouse, you should have been drafted, absolutely.
Oh, man. I approve. Double down, Rick. Say he should have been a first-round pick. Come on. Oh, man. I love it. Because I actually did write Ryan Stonehouse for the fun of it as one of my names to get drafted. I love it. I mean, hey, he did something none of these rookies did, Justin. He actually broke some records. You're telling me that guy shouldn't be a first-round pick if he's already breaking NFL records?
I'm not going to argue against it.
No, but I absolutely love it. I'm not going to argue against it, say the very least. Justin, who are your 3 guys that should have gone? If you have something similar to Rick, if you have maybe one of your guys should have just been drafted overall or like drafted like a round or 2 higher, that's fine. But more so guys that should have been first-round picks, who we got on your list, bro?
Well, I think there's something to say about the lack of running backs in the first round. I mean, there were a couple teams this year that, really, really benefited from their rookie running backs. And they really weren't the same, especially one of them. And again, I'm going to stick with my fandom here. I'm going to go with the Jets. I'm going to go with Breece Hall. I mean, he was arguably the best running back in the league this year. Best rookie running back in the league this year. If it wasn't for some injury, he would have probably won Offensive Rookie of the Year over Garrett Wilson. He started off that strong. He was having a good year. And as soon as he got hurt, they weren't the same team anymore. They just weren't. They didn't have that same kind of production. I mean, Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight did fine filling in for him. They were still productive running the ball, but when he was on the field, they were scoring at a much higher clip. So it's an interesting thing that just because you have these productive running backs, they don't get drafted in the first round. I don't necessarily understand it. Another one is Kenneth Walker. Again, when Kenneth Walker was running the ball for them, they were excellent. I know he came in as the backup, and there's a reason that they let Rashard Penny walk in the offseason this year, but Kenneth Walker was a bell cow back for them. I mean, he had a ton of carries. Let's look up his stats. He had 9 rushing touchdowns and over 1,000 rushing yards. I mean, he had a great year. He had a top running back year, and which is rare, I think, for a rookie. So good for him. He definitely deserved to be in the first round as well. And look at you. We have to say it. I mean, our guy out in San Francisco, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. He was the best rookie quarterback in the league this year.
Very true.
Was. I mean, you're not going to. How can you compare him to the other guys? I mean, I know he played more than a lot of these guys. He played more than Desmond Ritter,
Willis, and Ritter, and them.
Well, yeah. but he didn't play more than Pickett, and he had a better year than Pickett did.
Yeah.
So it's such a shame that he got injured in the playoffs last year. I would have really loved to see if he could have taken a step forward this year, especially because we don't know if Trey Lance is going to be healthy coming into the year. But yeah, I mean, with that kind of production, I bet you that there are 31 NFL teams, maybe less. Maybe there's like 25 NFL teams that are like, damn, maybe we should have given this guy a look. You know, he clearly seems to be able to play. Maybe we should have given him a chance earlier on.
Could you imagine if the Steelers had picked Brock Purdy at 20 instead of Pickett? People would have lost their minds.
Crucified. Yeah.
Sacrilege.
I can't.
Sacrilege, I tell you.
But realistically, hey, he probably should have been.
Maybe, perhaps, or even higher. Who knows? I'm more so happy that none of the guys that I have on my list were taken. So thank you to you boys. This worked out perfectly well. All right. Let me just say it outright. Tariq Woolen should have been a first round pick. I know he's not a shutdown man-to-man corner like, Sauce Gardner, and maybe what Stingley is supposed to be in the Texans. Who knows what the hell he's going to be this season in their defensive scheme. But let's be real here. I'm pretty sure he was second place in defensive rookie of the year voting. Like all the interceptions he had, he became a playmaker very early. He was a guy that our show specifically pointed out in our mock draft last season as a guy that we were willing to take in the third round. And I think he fell to the fifth round, if I'm not mistaken, right, Justin?
I think so.
So our show gave him credit last year. Maybe we should have given him even more credit because at the end of the day, he played like a first round rookie corner would have, and it would have. He gave. Obviously, Sauce was going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year to me no matter what last season, but he gave him a little bit of a run for his money because he was just stacking up, highlight after highlight, play after play. He did an absolutely phenomenal job, to say the very least. Was he also not? Wasn't he the one that got the interception on that little Tom Brady trick play that the Buccaneers were trying to run last season? That was him, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So had Sauce Gardner not had this amazing rookie season, I would have given Woolen Rookie of the Year based off of that one play right there and the image that it produced for us. But obviously, Sauce Gardner was a little bit too great for that. So that's my number one. Number two, George Pickens. I think in a class that had a couple wide receivers that were whiffs in the first round, I think George Pickens was nowhere near a whiff. He had a little over 800 yards for his rookie season, 4 touchdowns, a good amount of catches. He had Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, and more importantly, he had Matt Canada as his offensive coordinator. Uf, Maron. Not good, to say the very least. And I think in a better system, I think with a better quarterback, better team, better offensive coordinator at the very least, I think things would have ended up even better for George Pickens. I think he probably could have had a 1,000-yard season, and I think he would have given a bigger challenge for Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson as offensive rookies of the year in what the final race was. So I have him as my number two. And my last guy, come on, God wasn't good. Cam Jurgens. He was tabbed by Jason Kelsey to be his successor at the center spot. He played a little bit of guard. He's projected to be the guard starting most likely from day one this season next to him. And again, he is supposed to replace Kelsey once the time comes when he finally retires. When that will be, who the hell knows? But Cam Jurgens definitely, I think, played extremely well. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tyler Linderbaum was the only interior. He wasn't the only interior offensive lineman that went. He was the only center that went. And there were a couple guys taken earlier than him. I know the Texans picked, I think it was Kenyon Green, and the Chargers picked Zion Johnson. I'm not saying anything against those guys. I think those guys had fine rookie seasons. I'm not saying I would immediately swap Cam Jurgens out with them. But I'm saying Cam Jurgens should have been a first-round pick last year's draft. Now, is part of that because of his last name? Immediately, yes, I'm biased. But I think considering the fact that Justin had a little bit of his own, I think I'm allowed to have a little bit of mine. So so at the end of the day, yes, Cam Jurgens to me should have been a first-round pick. So should Ryan Stonehouse. But no, in all seriousness, I think those guys would have been my guys who could have gone up to be first-round picks. Relatively speaking, I agree with yours. Kind of agree with Rick's. Obviously, I know Ryan Stonehouse wouldn't be a first-round pick, but maybe a fourth. Who knows? But yeah, I think he went undrafted and he broke the records. I think he probably should have been a 4th or 5th round pick, to say the very least. So there is that. I'm good with yours. What do you think of mine, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, Tariq Woolen is probably someone we should have mentioned. I could have probably added him in instead of 2 running backs.
To be fair, we try to be unique here. Like, we try to be different. One of us was going to mention him. So
yeah, absolutely. And I do love George Pickens there as well. I mean, obviously, maybe he could have been the wide receiver that got in the first round instead of Treylon Burks to your Tennessee Titans. And then you could have switched it and you could have said, oh, Treylon Burks probably deserved to be in the first round because the Titans.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, whoever the Titans pick was going to get screwed over no matter what last season. So yeah, but I think Pickens, obviously he fell a little bit because he didn't play a good chunk in college. He missed some time, but yeah, I think he definitely proved that he was for certain first round pick. And this goes past it because I know he had the one highlight play that like everyone made a big deal out of. That's not even the reason why I'm picking him. He had a good rookie season. Like, relatively speaking, he had a good rookie season. As is apropos for Steelers, second, third, fourth receivers, they tend to just find gems in the draft, and they continue to do so there with Pickens. So, I mean, good job with the Steelers. Like, they know how to scout and draft wide receivers, man. You can't say anything else about it aside from good there. All right. Those were all of our threes. Justin, it's time for us. We have to be professors here, which is very, that's a reprieve for us because we've always been the one getting graded our whole lives. But now we got to give some grades here. But before we give some grades, of course, we know who needs to start out the affair. Rick, real quick, get back here. Give us your 2022 first round draft grade.
About my first round grade for last year, I thought about a B-, but I'm going to go with a C. I'm going to drop it down a little bit. I think there were some misses. I mentioned a few of them, and you guys have mentioned them as well. I think there were some more misses that we're not considering. I think, the offensive line was good until the middle of the run when Kenyon Green was picked before Zion Johnson. That was a big surprise to me. Cole Strange being picked in the first round, that was a big surprise to me. There were so many trades going on as well in the first round that it was just a little bit too hard to follow at times. And everybody missed with the quarterbacks. I mean, Kenny Pickett going number 20 as the first overall quarterback taken was a big surprise since we all had quarterbacks going, top 3, top 4, top 5. But it showed that this draft class was weaker in the quarterback room. Where it was strong was in the linebacking core. Like I said, Devin Lloyd had a great season. And the secondary really showed out too. I mean, Sauce Gardner was phenomenal. Tariq Woolen was great. Jaquan Brisker can't ask for anything better than what those guys did. But overall, that first round was just a little questionable at times. It almost seemed like nobody wanted to make picks. And when they did, there were guys that just filled out needs on the board, and it wasn't really anything that special for me. So hopefully this year we get a better draft class this year. But I might be a little bit more strict on it than the rest of y'all. But I think the first round this year, if I had to grade it right now, it's middle of the road. It's a C for me. It wasn't as impressive as it should have been.
So I'm confused. Are we grading it in terms of entertainment and compared to other drafts value, or are we grading it in terms of, hey, this is where the player should have been picked. Teams did well as opposed to teams doing poorly.
It's how you think it should go. I mean, you could base it off of that. Or you could just, I figured to just base it off of how did the draft play out and how did performances play out. That's kind of what I more so tried to do.
I think for the most part, the correct players were taken where they were supposed to be taken. I mean, there was a couple of, issues, but I don't think any pick so far is a glaring, obvious bust. You got a lot of production out of the guys in the first round. There were lots of players in deeper rounds that made, big impacts in their rookie years. And it'll be interesting to see definitively where they end up as their careers play out. But I mean, for the most part, I think things did pretty well. I agree the quarterbacks were a little bit lacking. Kenny Pickett was obviously the top guy coming out and deserved to be picked number 1 in his position overall. The only one that was an obvious swing and miss to me was Brock Purdy, because he should have, maybe you're going to give all the credit to Shanahan there, which he very well might have to. But look, I think that overall that the right players landed where they were supposed to. And until you get to the second or third round, there aren't very many draft picks where you're like, all right. I mean, yeah, Cole Strange was projected to go the third round, ended up going in the first round. He still started 17 games for the Patriots.
It's also a Belichick thing. Belichick just tends to be pretty
decent offensive line play last year. I mean, I don't remember seeing him give up a ton of sacks or have a ton of penalties. I mean, I'm sure he had some mistakes here and there. It was obvious why he wasn't projected to be a number 1, a first round pick, but the dude played well. So I can't even argue against it. I mean, none of us put him in on our misses when we pick 3 misses. So, I'll give it maybe a B+.
Yeah.
It wasn't the most exciting draft, but the players were taken, I think, for the most part, correctly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm willing to give it a B+. I was teetering for very briefly on A-, but I look back a little bit more, and then I'm like, nah, I don't think I could give it an A. Also, unless at least half the draft balls out their rookie season, I don't think you could give a first round, especially an A, So I bumped it down. But I think B plus is more than fair for this draft class. I think a lot of these guys performed well. Like you said, Justin, I think for a lot of the picks, the right player was selected, and a lot of these guys performed pretty well. I know Rick makes the deal of Kenyon Green being taken before Zion Johnson. Zion Johnson played pretty good, but I think Kenyon Green was more than serviceable for the Houston Texans. Like, I think Kenyon Green is still going to be a guy who has a decade-long career in this league because he's a good enough player. Like, I think, like you said, there were a couple misses, yes, but for the most part, it's not egregious. I think there have been worse drafts.
Oh, yes.
And I don't think 2022 was anywhere near that. And again, some of these guys, they could perform, but like some of the guys we pointed out was due to injury, due to coming in with an injury, missing time in college, which I think is a big deal. Like, I think this draft could, in a year from now, they could very much skyrocket up to looking like an A- draft class for sure, especially this first round. So I'm with you. I say B plus. I'd maybe give it a B plus because I think the guys that they hit really well right now. And if they just keep on going up, this is going to be a really good draft class at the very least. So that ends our 2022 NFL draft look back, guys. That was fun, to say the very least. There was a fun time there. And we're just about at the end of the show, but we do have two more things here really fast. Like I mentioned at the top, next week is the 2023 Sports Agents of Chaos 3-round mock. And I have all the teams that we have here. I don't have it in the exact order of, compared to the draft. You'll see that next week. We'll have our mock draft simulator next week. But I do have all of our teams here for official announcing. So let's start with Rick because he's not here right now. So these are Rick's teams. So Rick's teams are the Houston Texans, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chicago Bears, of course, the Denver Broncos, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Green Bay Packers, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Atlanta Falcons. So immediately, Justin, any team you're most excited for Rick to have to pick for, aside from his Bears?
No.
No? No? All right, thanks. All right, moving on to your picks here, bud. Thanks for that. Let's go to the teams that Justin's going to get to pick for next week. He gets the Detroit Lions. He gets the Pittsburgh Steelers. He gets the New York Jets. So his New York Jets. It was only fair that Rick and Justin got their teams. The San Francisco 49ers. I'm so sorry for you. He got the Tennessee Titans on. This was all done via Wheel of Chaos, by the way, guys, just for the record. We weren't going to do that on stream because, God, that would have taken too long, especially with the Wi-Fi service today. We probably would have finished the show. He also got the Dallas Cowboys. He got the Arizona Cardinals. He got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He got the Los Angeles Rams, and he got the Indianapolis Colts. So that was Justin's slew of teams there. Any team that you're most excited to pick, or shall I just move on to mine?
Besides the Jets, I'm actually interested in picking for the Lions. I'm curious to see who's going to be available when I come up and how I can see if I can make that team better.
Yeah, for sure. Also, it's funny because you mentioned the Rams earlier, what they could do with their picks. Well, you got the Rams here, buddy. So let's get to drafting.
I cannot wait to use all of the Ram pick.
You're going to try to trade their other picks, even though we're not doing trades in this mock. Not surprised. All right, and my picks for this draft, I got the Seattle Seahawks. So Gino, don't worry, got more help coming your way, my guy. Going to get you in that Ring of Honor definitively after next season. So I got the Seahawks. I got the Minnesota Vikings, unfortunately. I got the New Orleans Saints. I got Rick's now former Washington Commanders, as he is confirmed in video for us. I got the Las Vegas Raiders. I got the New England Patriots. So I'll be trying to re-give Justin some more PTSD here. I got the Los Angeles Chargers. I got the Miami Dolphins. I got the Buffalo Bills. I got the New York Giants. So I have 3/4 of the NFC East here. Funny enough, I think we all got 3/4 of at least one division in all of our selections. You got 3/4 of the NFC West. Rick got 3/4 of the AFC North, and I got 3/4 of the AFC East. I also got half of the NFC East as well. So fun times. I got to say, teams I'm most excited to fill out, obviously the Seahawks. Let's go, Gino. I'm interested to pick for the Panthers because obviously I know who I'm going to pick with the number one pick. Spoiler alert, I got the number one pick, guys. I know who I'm going with my number one overall pick, but then after that, because the Panthers, via other trades and stuff, they only have 2 other picks to use in this draft in terms of like the first 3 rounds. I'm very interested to see who's available come those selections and make those picks, right? I'm very interested to try to surround this rookie quarterback with some more talent here. So I'm intrigued with those 2 teams. Other than that, I will say the Raiders intrigue me because it depends on how the draft board falls. I don't know what I want to do with their first round pick. I'm going to be real with you. I don't know what I want to do with the first round pick for the Raiders. To be fair, I don't even know if they know what they want to do for their first round pick. So it's gonna be interesting. We're gonna have a fun time, guys. the Sports Agents of Chaos 2023 3-round mock. We are super excited for that. And before we end the show, you guys already know how the show ends on a weekly basis. He may not be here again in person, but he is always with us in spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at podium time.
Because I got some pizza in the back and I'm hungry and I'm fed up with a lot of things. Got a lot of problems with you people, and now you're going to hear about it. Podium spot number 3, the WWE. Did you see this in their package to hype up the Rey Mysterio versus Dominic Mysterio match? They decided to try and use an image of a prison yard to hype up the fact that Dom was his ex-con, and they used a photo of Auschwitz. And when they were pressed on it, Chief Content Officer, whoever it was, said basically, we didn't know what it was we were doing it. Then why do it? Then why use that imagery if you don't know what it's from? Or hire PAs or interns that know their history. Like, this is the problem with dealing with this stuff. You basically made light of the largest atrocity in human history because of this kayfabe story you're telling. Like, get better, WWE. Ridiculous. Number 2. This is more of a Long Island regional thing, so I lose some people here, but dairy barns. They're closing down now. They're the little red barns that you would drive through to get, like, groceries for. I want to ask a question. What's with the property? Because you can't build a house on that property. You can't, build a store there, so we're going to have eyesores now because you can't maintain this business and the dairy barns are all closing? Like, this was not a smart thing. You got to think about these things before you do them. And you think about, what happens if it closes to figure out how to repopulate and reuse that land. Because right now, ain't working for you. And number 1, this is my appeal to you as a society. I was driving the other day, and I happened to see a cat crossing the road. And me, being the good-natured person that I am, when I'm not ranting about the world and how things are terrible, like Duncan, decided to stop for the cat to cross the road. The cat literally looks both ways, crosses the street, meows its thanks to me, and goes on its merry way. If a tabby cat or a calico could do that, and I let somebody who's driving a car cut in front of me to get into the Dunkin' drive-thru lane, you want to thank me? You want to, put up the hand and say thanks? Or you want to keep slipping on your coffee and listening to your ear pods, which you can't be driving with? Terrible. People, if you're driving, it's common courtesy. If you let somebody in, you should get thanked. If somebody lets you in, you should thank them. It's not a hard concept of being courteous and kind to other people. And we've lost that because all we're doing is staring at our phones and thinking about all of ourselves. Me, me, me. No, that's not the case. That's not how this works anymore. So we have to think about everybody, even the Adam Ranks of the world. There's a thaw right now in our relationship because I'm a Bears fan now. There's a thaw, a very small thaw, but a thaw. And especially for you, Kyrgyzstan, you're okay for now, but I need you to buy me another vowel, please. Thank you. I got to go eat this pizza.
Did you also forget that he named Kyrgyzstan as the country he's rivaling with now? Because I'm not going to lie, I kind of forgot.
I did not remember now.
But now we do. Are we going to forget by next week? Probably.
Next week. Forget by tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness. What do you think of the driving etiquette portion of it, Justin? Does Rick have a point there? It's common courtesy. You have to, give up.
It's not that hard to say thank you.
I agree. I was just curious. Have you ever had an encounter like that similar? Because I'm assuming that's coming from something that Rick is burying down deep.
I don't know. I not that off the top of my head that I could think of. I'm sure I have.
Right.
But I get angry when I drive. So.
Ooh.
I don't want to say I have road rage, but I'm not a happy driver most of the time.
Copy. So Rick has done a couple episodes out of his car while driving on the podcast. Confirmed Justin will not do that because he may or may not
roll up that swear jar. I don't even like watching people walk on the sidewalk while I drive. Get out of my way.
But you're not going on the sidewalk.
I don't want to see you. I don't want to, just let me drive. I just want to be able to drive at whatever speed I want, no matter what I'm doing, no obstacles. If I have to slow down because you exist, I'm angry.
All right. Confirmed. Justin has road issues, ladies and gentlemen. Will that play any factor into his mock draft next week? Probably not, but I needed some that was poorly.
You never know.
So That being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. Not necessarily chaotic, I think, in terms of our takes, but there were other factors that had to do with the chaos this week, including, us going dead air because of Xfinity Wi-Fi here for a couple minutes. So thank you for that, Xfinity. Please be better by the time we have to do our mock draft next week. But anyways, irregardless of that, guys, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode. Again, next week, big episode. It was massive last season. I just want to say real quick, thank you all so much for watching the mock last season. The mock still to this date is our most viewed episode. It's, the one that most people have watched. Let's surpass that this season. It's going to be fun. 3 brand new rounds for us to draft for. All the analysis, all the takes, all the picks coming next week here on the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you guys next week.